So hello to everyone. My name is Julia Uti, and I would like to welcome you in the name of Galerie Anita Beckers to this artist talk between Spanish-American media artist Daniel Canogar and Dr. Sebastian Baden, curator of contemporary art, sculpture, and new media at Kunsthalle Mannheim, one of Germany's most renowned museums and art collections. So a special welcome and a huge thank you goes to our two speakers. Hello, Daniel, and hello, Sebastian.
Hello, it's wonderful to be with the two of you here today.
Thank you for coming. This talk will be recorded and will be made available to watch on our website later on. Therefore, I would ask the audience to please keep your cameras and microphones switched off the entire time so that the focus can be on our two speakers. The chat function is open, and at the end of the talk, there will be 10 to 15 minutes where you can ask questions via the chat function, which I will read out loud to Daniel Canogar and Dr. Sebastian Baden. The topic of today's conversation will be the current show Latencies at Galerie Anita Beckers, which presents Daniel Canogar's newest work series of the same name, as well as the series Echo and Small Data. The conversation will also dive into Daniel Canogar's artistic practice and career. Daniel Canogar, who gained his MA from NYU at the International Center of Photography in 1990, has since been working and exhibiting internationally, realizing large-scale video and generative animation projections, creating permanent public art installations with flexible LED screens, and most recently, a multi-laser projection for the Noor Riyadh Light and Art Festival in Saudi Arabia. But in more detail, his work will be examined now by Dr. Sebastian Baden, who is an art historian, curator, and art critic. He studied fine arts, art education, art history, and German studies and sociology at the Art Academy in Karlsruhe, Germany, and Bern, Switzerland. He has been awarded the ICA International Incentive Prize for Young Art Critics in 2013, and from 2016 on, he has been the curator of contemporary art, sculpture, and new media at Kunsthalle Mannheim. And now, I would like to hand over to Dr. Sebastian Baden and Daniel Canogar. I hope you all enjoy.
Thank you so much, dear Julia and dear Daniel, for inviting me as a partner in this conversation. And also thank you to Anita and the gallery who is organizing this talk and is offering the possibility to dive into the media world and the media spheres that Daniel Canogar has been creating throughout the last decades. And my interest today is to guide you through some stations of his career and some perspectives on different of his works. And at the end, to bring the view into the exhibition that you can see at the gallery in Frankfurt. So my task today is to be the one who is asking questions and tries to convey some ideas of Daniel's work to you as the audience. And when you see parts of the exhibition and the animated background behind me, this means that we are not in the exhibition due to pandemic reasons, as we all know. And that's also a starting point, because we will have images that we will share through the presentation that I'm going to move through, but we don't have the possibility to share the moving images. So we would like to recommend you check the website of the artist and the gallery, and especially visit the show if it's possible for you to be in Germany or even in Frankfurt if you join us today, and to see the works in the live presentation. But for the first step, it's important to ask, where do these works come from and what's the basic approach of the artist? And when I met the artist Daniel in his exhibition, it was for me a very sensualistic experience, which reminded me on experiences that I had in a similar way when I started my own career and studies in Karlsruhe, where the ZKM is a Center of Media Art is based, and which is one of the most relevant museums for media art. So as Anita's gallery is one of the galleries that's showing media art, and media art that's the question that we will talk about, its definition today. Where does it come from? When has it been founded? And why has Daniel become such a specialist in this field? And also maybe why museums like the one I'm working with still have to take this movement and include more works of these in collections. And where do we find artworks like Daniel's, not only in museums and galleries, but also in the public sphere? So if you allow to start with the first slide, Daniel, I would try to show an image which presents the artist in the gallery space, and not in the gallery, in the studio space. And why did we choose this image? That's a reason I've been choosing, of course. I'm thinking about Marshall McLuhan and his media theory, in which he says the medium is the message. And in a way, how light as a signal has become one of the fundamental practices of our information and communication sphere nowadays. Because if you think about analog media like writing, there has been a development of media art that is closely linked to the way how we convey information, and how technical developments are fundamental for the practices of media art. And not only this, if we speak about media art, it doesn't mean showing a video with a projector on a wall. This is far too simple. We will think about the reflection, the meta level of going into media art as the technical questions, and the technical questions that are also related to the content and to what the artist not only wants to say, that's the wrong way, but what is his interest. And so, Daniel, the first question may be the thing that you are holding in your hands in this picture. It's something which is not conventional to the normal users. I wouldn't have that at home. It's something you told me that has been produced because of your interest and of course because of your specification. And that's the first question. Where does it come from? What's this material about? We don't speak about painting like colors a painter uses, but we speak about light and images and information. So maybe that's my first question.
Thank you, Sebastian, and thank you also for accepting to have this this dialogue, this conversation. Well, what you're seeing me doing here is lying on the floor of my studio in Madrid, and I'm placing this LED tile. This is a special kind of technology that was developed for this studio because this particular tiles are completely flexible. They can be twisted and they can be torqued. And this is something that didn't exist. And I was very keen as an artist. We tend to like to kind of push the boundaries of the traditional use of the materials or the media or the tools that we use. And in this case, the question was, why do screens always have to be flat? Why do they always have to be rectangular? Why can we not start thinking of screens as membranes that can be folded and twisted, and start having a dialogue with a space that contains the screen, with the architecture? So out of that curiosity, and working in collaboration with Diego Mellado, who's the engineer and project manager of the studio, we started looking for fabricators worldwide that could build this for us. And finally we succeeded. And this is being, as you say, to go back to Marshall McLuhan's quote of "the media is the message." In this case, I think this is very much the case, because it's thinking about screens as not only a sculptural presence that I'm twisting and bending and folding, and this is what I'm doing literally in this picture. I'm magnetically sticking the flexible LED tiles to a curving metal structure. I'm also thinking about the presence of screens, or the mutations of screens from just these kind of window-like devices to the world, and more thinking about them more as membranes, as skin, as something that's also losing its materiality. It's almost like melting. So this is, of course, brings up questions that go beyond just the idea of the screen, but more about media technology and the tremendous presence of screens all around us. from covering entire buildings on media facades to on our smartwatches and obviously our smartphones, etc. So I'm really questioning the materiality of technology. This is one of my big concerns that is very present right now in my thinking.
There's a wonderful link in your work, which I found in an interview that you gave to Estrella Diego in the Fluctuations catalog. And you must have made a wonderful experience in Lima when you have been in Latin America in the Museum of Tapestry. And there you explain that you found something that is very much related to your way of thinking. And that reminded me on a study of Abi Warburg, who is one of the, let's say, most important art historians of the early 20th century. And he was writing on the tapestry of the Burgundian emperor in France in the Renaissance era. And what he mentioned was that it's about the mobility of the medium, that it's not a static instrument, which you would have like in the church, as it is an instrument for adoration, but it's something that represents a certain information, but it's also constructed through a certain technique. And on the one hand side, we have this technique of weaving in Europe, but it's also something that you can find in Latin America, like in Lima and in ancient cultures. And so you bring it up to a updated level of contemporary media. How did you develop this process of thinking of the ancient and the contemporary medium as a light carpet, as I would call it?
Yeah, I think this reference you're making to this very exciting discovery of a collection of pre-Columbian textiles in Lima. It's in the Amano Museum. It's a private collection that belongs to a Japanese family. And basically, when I walked into that private collection, I was literally zero interested in textiles. It felt like too crafty and artisanal. And, you know, I'm supposed to be an artist is thinking about higher art concepts. And I walked out of there dazzled by what I saw. The richness of the techniques, the richness of the weaving, but more importantly, how even the different kinds of weaving techniques in pre-Columbian cultures had different symbolisms, so it's the way it was made in itself, the way the different threads were weaved together had a significance beyond the jaguar or the snake or whatever was represented on these textiles. It was really with that visit that I saw a very direct lineage from textiles to the screens that are so present in our contemporary culture. I think we need to think our screens as a contemporary form of tapestries and textiles. In fact, I mean, the equivalence is kind of incredible, because if you look inside a screen, you see all these cables, and you see the way you would look at the underside of a rug, and you see the threads and the knots. So this, for me, was a very interesting way of thinking of screens, of how we weave imagery, how we create imagery, how we represent the world through this media. And it really underlined, again, my interest in the materialness of the artifact, the materialness of technology, the hardware, you know, which really lives a very strong imprint in the reading, the message, the symbolisms, the metaphors around the project.
Exactly. So the symbolisms and metaphors, that would be the next I have to ask about, because when I was confronted with your works for the first time, and I think the Echo series was the first works that I've seen, I was searching or thinking about the representation of symbolism, because if you see those works first time, it's much about the light and the intensity of it filling the room, filling the space, and being on an abstract level. But on the foundation of the work, it's not the abstraction, but it's kind of facts that you are collecting, that you are working with from cultural backgrounds. And I think we can switch to the next slide, which depicts one of the earlier works that you have been producing. And instead of these high-tech tiles that are the very recent elements you're working with, you started with the basic element of the light bulb, not the light bulb itself, but the cable where the information is spread, like the internet cable, and with the projection on the end of this cable. And out of this projection, there's the representation of an image. So what we can see here is a very special form of projection. And I would like to ask you, how does this work, and how did the idea came up to bring this, let's say, embedded scenery into the space of an exhibition?
Yes, that's a great question. I think it's important perhaps to note that my beginnings as an artist were with photography, but I really became much more interested in the experience of being in the darkroom with the red lights, with the light coming out of the enlarger and burning, literally burning the surface of a light sensitive piece of paper. And the magic of seeing that image later appear in the liquid of the developer. It was that experience, the experience of darkness and light and the red lights and even the smell of chemicals. There was a certain kind of ritualistic experience of kind of almost like a alchemical connection with light, darkness, and the image. So in a way, a work like this comes a lot from that experience of these kind of dark spaces where you're kind of, you know, you kind of, you have a sense of being transported to another reality. And again, it was also about the technology, the darkroom, the enlarger, which in this case with teratologies, the enlarger is substituted with these fiber optic cables that were really created for lighting and that I tweaked. This is something that I seem to keep on doing, use technologies that kind of exist. Team and I, we kind of tweak them, we hack them, we change their normal uses and turn them into a new medium. In this case, with one projector, I would connect a whole bunch of fiber optic cables. So each one of these fiber optic cables had an optical device at the end. You can kind of see it in this picture. And there was also, I was able to put a photographic slide into the optics. So out of one projector, I was able to create a multi-projection environment where the images were projecting not only on the walls, but on the public. The fiber optic cables were very, like almost like mobiles, are very sensitive to currents of air or people walking in the space. And it's kind of interesting that you selected this image also during the pandemic, because this particular piece is projecting a virus, bacteria, and fungi, all that could potentially be found in the human body. Teratologies was this kind of atlas of fantastical and monstrous beings that were created in the medieval times. So I was kind of trying to think what would be the teratologies of the early 21st century. And it was really those invisible microorganisms that kind of haunt us more so today than ever, that I think are what kind of frighten us. So I was kind of trying to explore that kind of environment and that kind of microbiological presence through this fiber optics, by the way, that are also used as endoscopic devices to explore the interior of the body.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Of course, there was a reason why I've been depicting that image due to the current state of the pandemic. And the imagery that we can see here were where facts like content seen through microscopes are presented in a way that they become abstract images. It looks like the expressionist or informal paintings in the way of formalist aesthetics. And combining these two elements, the media technology on the one hand and the basic scientific technology on the other hand, this is a fundament to your work. And when I go to the next slide, I hope I remember the correct one. Yes, I want to refer to this way of how you transfer not the scientific image like the bacteria, but probably art historical information on the surface of the institution, as it is the outside presentation that we can see here. And that's I wanted to depict this work. it's not only the inside, the white cube and the surface of the wall, the white wall in which you are working, but you're also using different surfaces like the literal architecture, the outside surface of the building. And maybe you can explain about the content of especially this public intervention.
Yes, well, what we're seeing here is a projection that I did on the outside of the Prado Museum in Madrid. They were celebrating their bicentennial, and they asked me to do an artwork to celebrate this anniversary. And so what I did is I asked them to give me their entire collection in JPEGs. They handed them over. It took a while, but they were finally able to give me the entire collection. And I projected them on 4 nights of December 2019, which was when the anniversary happened, in this kind of melting liquid-like animation. So the Goyas and the Velázquez and the Hieronymus Bosch and all these amazing artworks that are part of the collection were literally melting in front of our eyes, becoming very liquid-like. In a way, also kind of going back to the primal matter of paint, because all these paintings in their original state were wet paint on a palette. So I was almost kind of interested in kind of going back to this kind of pre-painting before it was actually a representation on canvas. But more importantly, I think I was really trying to think about an archive or a collection, and how our archives and locations where we bring together information have gone from material-based media, such as a DVD or a hard drive or a server, to the cloud-based archives, where these images, these paintings become data that are circulating, that are being consumed online. The Prado Museum has a huge following online. It did before the pandemic, now so more than ever during the pandemic. And I'm really trying to understand the mutation and even I would say the epistemological changes towards thinking about how knowledge is stored and how we want to conserve this information for the future. How will that affect the nature of the archive itself? How that is mutated and changed, and what are we leaving behind, and what are we bringing that's new to kind of collecting this information. The work is also an homage to Zygmunt Bauman's Liquid Modernity. That was a fabulous essay that was so inspiring when I read it, where he really talks about this kind of software-based modernity, where everything is in a state of flux, everything is constantly changing. The idea of the liquid as something that really captures the moment we live in, where you know, information is circulating and only makes sense as this kind of river of data that's constantly circulating through the internet. What happens when we funnel art through that? How does art change? What survives? Again, it's really questioning the materiality itself of the artwork.
Talking about these, the liquid modernity, I also found your comment on this in the fluctuations catalog, and it came to my mind already before that there must be Zygmunt Bauman appearing in this work somewhere, and plop, it came up. So I was quite happy in this moment, and asking myself, this way of sociological approach that Zygmunt Bauman has is transferred in your work to a technical approach. The liquidity is coming from programming. So this means that it's not a liquid based on the liquid of water, but it's based on 1 and 0, which is the language of programming of how, or at least of rather conventional traditional programming, which today changed. But the interesting thing is the algorithm on the one hand and the metamorphosis, which is visible on the other hand. And when we've been talking about the teratologies before, we still had the photographs. In a way, it showed the reality in enlarged scenes. But here you have the liquid transformation, the metamorphosis, and that's my question. How do you produce this metamorphosis? What's the algorithm that you have to program or to write? as a programmer to produce this kind of imagery?
Absolutely. It's, well, we use open frameworks, and then we design these shaders, as they're called, ways of being able to distort and transform imagery that we have in our, shall we say, the archive or the library of the artwork that in the computer. But of course, there's this really fundamental change, because I started in photography, this fixed image, then maybe video that was a loop that had a beginning and an end. And then we arrived to this algorithmic generative way of creating moving images that is, for me, just kind of blew my mind. And it's really hard to go back now to loops that, repeat themselves always the same, because that's the magic of generative algorithmic work, is that it's constantly mutating, it's constantly transforming, it never repeats itself. In a way, it has more to do with performance art than with say traditional film or video. It's the art is very much in the algorithm. It's about how you code it. Unfortunately, I don't code myself, but I have the best programmer in the world working under my wings in my studio, Daniel Canogar, who does some fabulous programming, while I torture him constantly, asking him to tweak this and tweak that. And again, it's just like this fundamental shift that has happened for me in the last 10 years, where it's really hard for me not to think of generative everything. I feel it's just this new logic. It really corresponds to this algorithmic reality that we live in. And it really is a fundamental change as an artist, and how I construct my artwork, how I think about my artwork, how I let it have a life of its own. A little bit of humility also, in terms of you can't really control it. You set the rules, you set the stage, and then the artwork kind of takes it on from there. So yes, of course, you're tweaking in with the algorithm, you're constantly making changes and subtle changes. But in the end, there's always surprises, or some new data comes in that totally knocks you out. And just, I've seen just incredible kind of accidental occurrences happen in some of my generative artwork that had not been planned. And that's kind of the magic of it, I think.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting how your work is still relatable to the process of a painting, in which also some things happen that are happening not on purpose or by coincidence. And also you have the way of the conceptual artist that is doing site-specific installations, because I guess for the Prado, this work is developed on a site-specific way.
Totally. It was made specifically with their collection to be projected on their building. And also very, in a way, kind of ephemeral, because this was just a 4-night event. Mm-hmm. Luckily, then the Prado Museum decided to purchase the artwork as a screen-based piece. I'm the only living artist that's part of the collection of the Prado, which is quite an honor. And I'm in stellar company, obviously, so it's very exciting for me. But yes, I'd like to respond to the specificity of the locations that I intervene. Sometimes literally taking information data from the venue or the location, but also the idiosyncrasies of the space itself. So for example, this is the Goya entrance to the Prado Museum. Mm-hmm. And it's not just this flat facade, it kind of has this indent, recessed area. And for me, it was crucial to be able to get into those corners that normally would be very difficult to reach, to fill them. Yeah. And this is important also if people later want to check out the webpage, either my webpage or, this is a piece that's, you can see it online quite easily. You would see how it not only is it's dropping, spilling down the facade, how it kind of really almost like this membrane or this second skin of the building. It really lines the surface of the facade in a very magical way, which of course we can now do with these amazing 25, 30,000 lumen projectors, which I never, ever could have dreamt of when I was starting out in my career. This is, as an artist working with light and projections is one of my main media. The possibilities now are just phenomenal. We're living very exciting times in that respect.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for the explanations on this work, because it's so specific, and it brings us to the next slide. I think because here it's not art history as images from the Prado collection, but it's about 2,400 movies that you have been checking for this installation, which was part of the Fluctuations exhibitions that you can see here. And I'm not sure, but I guess we are looking into the Sica in Gentium installation with the DVDs, if I'm right. And that's the next way of seeing you as an artist depicting contemporary media, which is a DVD as a platform to transport the information, but the information itself was recorded on film before, because it's movies that you had to look, and out of these movies you took certain informations like scenes that you have been researching for. And I could read that you made an Excel sheet with all the, let's say, literal information on the films and the scenes that we depicted. But in the end, the audience, the public can just see the abstract transformation. So that would be the next step. And we are heading towards the exhibition in Frankfurt. But for me, as the art historian, and also for the audience, I hope through these stations that we are covering here, we can try to understand the process of your work much better than as before. And therefore, let us have some explanations on especially this installation, please.
Absolutely. So if in the previous installation that we were just seeing with the Amalgama collection, the archive of paintings that belong to this museum, I was liquefying them. And I was really thinking about like these modern forms of cloud-based archives that are constantly circulating or mutating or online. This for me is more about where we're coming from as a culture, with material-based media as a technology to store knowledge and information. So as you were saying, these are 2,400 DVDs, movies in DVD formats. I viewed all of them, selected clips from each one of the DVDs, and then project them back onto the surface of the DVDs, creating this very kind of kaleidoscopic environment that is very kind of a very rich experience when you're in it, and with also really a beautiful soundscape created by Alex McSween, who is a composer who I collaborated with on this work. So again, this was almost like wanting to give a good send-off, a good heartfelt goodbye to the DVD as a dying technology, as an obsolete technology that I initially thought was here to stay. I thought this was the ultimate way of storing my files and my artwork and recording everything on DVDs, films, and my own documentation of my own work. And yet suddenly streaming exploded and Netflix and then suddenly DVD was history. So all these DVDs were mostly picked up from the garbage, from recycling centers, from flea markets, places that basically where things go to die. And I wanted to rescue this material, rescue it, and also in a literal physical way, rescue the DVDs from getting destroyed, but also rescue them in terms of the memories that are associated with all these media. Remembering, for example, the fabulous experience of going to a video club and selecting, for the weekend, 2 or 3 films that you were going to watch, and it was so exciting. You just all else you need to get was the popcorn, and you would have the best weekend ever. And of course, scrolling through the Netflix catalog is not the same. I don't enjoy it much. It doesn't provide the same kind of excitement, but it is thinking about archives, about physical material-based archives that have basically, since the invention of the printing press with Gutenberg until basically 10 years ago, there's an historical arc that is fundamental to how we stored and distributed information on material-based media that suddenly went poof. and it's disappeared, and they are disappearing, and libraries are not being visited hardly anymore, and everything is now getting uploaded. And of course, we are still trying to understand the huge consequences, social, political, cultural, that this changes. We're right in the thick of it. And as an artist, I'm really trying to capture and understand that change. And in a way, my exhibition Latencies, that change is present also.
Exactly, that's what we are coming to later on. But you hit one of the central keywords, which is obsolescence, that we noticed for today, and the data, big data especially, in a way that our cultural memory and our media memory extremely changed through the last years, and also the collective memory, which is part of the brains and not of the media that we have, and it's confronted with different informations on different platforms. So we keep this in mind and go to the next slide, because here we have on the one hand another public space, and we have an information which is created from not only the static basis, because let's say the DVD and the films, it's a medium that you would have before. And if you work with photography and the color slides from bacteria, that's also, or the art historical images from the Prado collections. So you have, let's say, the source, which is static or haptic, it exists. And here we talk about something which is more ephemerical, more performative, because I guess I'm right, you've been choosing the biological aspects of that's Tampa, Florida, of the outside nature of the airport, or nature itself. So this seems to be a growing field of grass and flowers that we can see here.
Yes, in this case, the screens are sculpted like vines that are coiling around the architecture of the terminal. And most of the plants and flowers you see are vines that are local, native to the subtropical climate of Tampa. And this also is important because this is a generative artwork. It's an algorithmic artwork. It's constantly changing. You never have the same amount of flowers or leaves, or even the way the plants grow. It never is the same. And the combination of different plants and different species is constantly changing. In fact, even to drive this point even further, we're connected to this artwork from the studio, and we can control the work, and we can introduce new species through the years. So it's like a public commission that's never really finished. Mm-hmm. And in a way, I'm kind of like this virtual gardener that's tending to this hanging garden on the other side of the ocean. But yes, it is also a good example of how I like to have a very direct dialogue with a space that contains these public art commissions. My initial reaction to the truss system in the terminal is like, oh no, I hate this. This is so ugly. And then eventually it's like, well, this is usually my way into my projects when I'm having difficulties, is turn the negative aspect of a space into a positive, use it rather than avoiding it, rather than trying to camouflage it or hide it, incorporate it into the artwork. And I think this is a very good example of that strategy.
Absolutely. I was very impressed by seeing how you could bring life into this kind of dead space. Of course, it's an airport and everyone is moving, but it's a non-lieu, you could say. It's not a place you would stay, or which would be a cozy, comfortable situation. And what you could gain from this situation is exactly the metamorphosis from the negative to the positive. It's maybe even like a photography that you are developing in a certain way. So that's why I wanted to show this, also due to the media that you are using, this LED tiles or the waves that would bring the technical development of contemporary media art to a new level, which, for example, I haven't seen before, in the way that the screen is really dynamically crossing a whole space, and it's not only a large screen or a projection, but it's really the screen going through, like the paintings did before in James Rosenquist's large way of doing pop art paintings.
Absolutely. And also you were mentioning before the idea of the biological and one, this is also botanical, but it is an interesting alignment I'm beginning to discover between algorithmic programming and how biology kind of multiplies and grows and creates from cells to botanical structures. I'm beginning to see there's some kind of interesting mirroring that's kind of mysterious to me, that is not perhaps is not being designed on purpose, but the biological and the algorithmic are kind of mirroring each other in a very interesting way. It's almost like I'm beginning to think that algorithms are nature 2.0 in a way, that we still haven't come full cycle, but there is a really interesting similar way of how nature kind of grows and multiplies and even dies, we could say.
And also how the human beings would implement nature into supernatural structures like halls like these, which are not airports, but halls to experiment and to salvage nature, like a zoo is doing, or a botanical garden.
Or a greenhouse, yes.
A treehouse. Well, I guess we are heading to the current exhibition, dear audience, and what we've been discussing before is, of course, our pathway to understanding series like Echoes and the small data series and the other works that are presented in the exhibition in Frankfurt. And when we are looking at these works here, which is the Echo series, we can find again the tiles, the LED tiles, and the dynamic spreading of the screen within the space. What we can also see, and this is an important fact of your work, Daniel, I guess, that you are not hiding the technical background, but you bring it forth, not to say up front, or you even turn it around as a visual component of the aesthetics of your work, to say that's a way of not institutional critique, but of institutional awareness, technical awareness, that you present to the audience how the work is being done and how our perception is based on this technical equipment. And that's what I really appreciate, that you're not hiding anything, but you make everything obvious except one, and that's the next question I have, the data that you collect and that you transfer into this abstract light painting.
Yes, again, it's an emphasis on the materiality of the screen itself. This is why I like to leave the cables, the data cables and the electric cables that bring electricity to the work. I like to leave them very exposed, almost like, again, going back to that metaphor of the textile. No, the textile is almost kind of becoming undone, and the threads and knots kind of hanging. And yes, I mean, the Echo series, all the screens are the same size, and then they were folded. And I went to this incredible place that specialized in folding metal. They usually fold these huge pieces of metal for building a bridge or something. I came with my pieces, and I was able to bend my metal structures, which is kind of what gives the artwork rigidity, and onto which the magnetic LED tiles then attach to create these sculptural screens. In this case, I like to think of each one of these artworks as creatures that are kind of listening to the echoes of the planet via the internet. They're all connected to the internet. You know, we live in the internet of things, where our refrigerators and our cars and our watches are connected to the internet. Well, why cannot the artworks also be connected to the internet? And they are listening and responding in a very kind of muted, subtle way to data that's coming into the artwork. So each one of the works you see in the screen is connected, is responding to different kind of planetary phenomena. So the one on the left picture in the foreground, we have basin. That is responding to the average waterfall, the average rainfall in 95 cities around the globe. It's updated every 10 seconds. What manifests from that data is an abstract animation that's very watery. and that basically gets more animated or less animated depending on how that average of rainfall is, if it's higher or lower. In the background, we have an artwork that responds to earthquakes. Every time there's an earthquake somewhere around the planet, there is a very intense moire kind of vibration starts happening. On the right picture, foreground, we have troposphere, which is kind of shaped like a chimney stack, like a smokestack for a factory in a way. And again, this is just the same shape of screen that's being kind of twisted into a more or less cylindrical shape, responding to air quality index, the AQI, basically pollution. And so the artwork changes colors. If the more polluted, the more orange, the cleaner the air, the more blue, and it fluctuates, like, in rush hours, usually it gets orange, at night gets a lot more blue. And then we have screens like on the background on the right picture, which is amber, where you can't even really see the screen. I almost think of the screen as being kind of rebellious, not wanting to satisfy our insatiable hunger for representation. I feel like the screens are kind of overwhelmed, and like I also kind of think of them as these creatures that are melting from excess, from too much information, from too much demand. And that one is responding to average forest fires that are burning at any given time around the planet.
So in a way, you are creating synesthetic artworks, because synesthetic means that when you listen, sound is becoming a color, or a certain letter is having a color, and so data is having a color in these works. But it's not by the synesthesia that you're producing through the perception in the human brain. It's also created by the algorithm that you have been programming before, and that is creating this kind of abstract light formation, which for me in the beginning was a big question. What do I see here? What is it represented as an information? Is it just a program that shows different ways of light, or does it have a really precise database from which the content is depicted and transformed? And yes, that's the case. So for me, this was also like opening the large door of a new information, let's say a new Westworld in a way, to bring in new ways of perception.
Yes, new ways of perception that have to do with experimenting this data in a way that's not about graphics, or it's not about charts, or it's not about numbers. In a way, I think as a society, we've become kind of numb to the statistics. So the issue of data visualization comes up a lot with my work, and I don't really feel I'm trying to visualize data. I'm trying to create an experience of data. Mm-hmm. And I'm trying to create a luminous experience, because the artworks really glow into this space. They expand beyond the physicality of the screen, and light up the ceilings and the walls, and they even kind of influence each other in the way they kind of congregate in a shared exhibition space. So it is about experiencing data, and also it's about using abstraction and very specific art historical references to abstraction. In a way, it's very handy for me to use abstraction, because data is an extremely abstract, intangible medium. And so it's very useful for me to use abstraction to kind of try to capture this, this excessive, intangible, immaterial, I would say almost phantasmagorical energy that's circulating right now between us. We have a lot of data that's kind of bouncing back and forth between you and I and with the public, but it's like, it's kind of, where is it? I can't see it, and we have this other facade that I'm basically trying to understand this kind of this mysteriousness of data. And one last thing I would say is, all of these artworks are also thinking a little bit about environmental climate change data. Mm-hmm. So it is the internet also that allows us to have these this huge amount of data that is in real time of what is happening on the planet. This is kind of nothing short of miraculous in a way that we can do this, but trying to create an art experience. I mean, I am an artist, I'm not a scientist. And I'm really interested in introducing a data into the history of art. I'm trying to also introduce, media art in general. I think is exists too much in a bubble, and I'm very interested in, and I think hopefully my generation, in my time, I will see a time where media art becomes fully incorporated into the history of art. My work comes from art. It comes from an artistic background. I studied art. I'm an artist. I'm not a scientist. I'm not a technologist. So that's also an important point I wanted to make.
Sure, yeah, and this is a very unique also selling point of your work, because when we've been discussing about some relatives, let's say, I was mentioning Olafur Eliasson and James Turrell, two artists that also work with light in an immense way, and that bring up their works from their own investigations on atmosphere, on light, and on ecological questions, like Eliasson or James Turrell, especially from just phenomenological perspectives that he has on light as something that creates space, and also meditations. But the meditation which I can find in the Echo series in your work, it's not about meditation. It's about rather the way of revelations, that I can see my perspective on these ecological questions in a total new way. And that's something that was very intriguing for me to find out about the background of the information that you bring in these works.
Great, thank you.
Let's see the next slide, which is just the installation view of two other series that we can find in the exhibition in Frankfurt. And in the following one, we have a closer look on the first of these two series, which is called the Latencies series. And this goes before the new small data series, but they are both related in a way. And here you have the screens as a tableau, which is the plinth or the basis of another part of the work, which is more sculptural-like. It reminded me on early modernist painting or sculpture from Elisitsky to Anton Pevsner, artists who have been part of the very modern avant-garde movement that wanted to bring the artist into a position where he can create society and also is an architect of not only society, but the architect of the world, and creates buildings, and artworks are just models for these buildings. And coming from the architecture to your work, we would have to speak about the infrastructure of this world of information. And parts of this infrastructure are integrated in this series. So where do they come from? Is it we can imagine it must be from some technical instruments like computers, but you explained to me that you have a very large fundus, a collection of these items in your studio, and you're always searching for more to extract the basic components.
Yes, I like to almost think of these works as like archaeology. This series is really also, if the data work like the Echo series is really kind of thinking forward, thinking about what we have now and into the future. These works are kind of looking at the ruins that big data has left behind, the obsolete technologies that are thrown out, and that I go to discover and to recover and rescue, I would say, going to junkyards and recycling centers. And these are all these heat dissipators that are found inside electronics that are used to bring down the heat. And they just have this extremely beautiful aesthetics, even though they're made and designed for purely functional reasons. I really thought of them as this kind of modernist architecture devices. And of course, when placed on the screen, there's an animation that I've created that activates them, that brings life back into them. And maybe we can even see this through some of the other works of this series. That's kind of my template I created with Latencies, is discovering these elements that are usually residual from thrown out pieces of electronics and computers and and all kinds of machinery, and I try to breathe life back into them. I try to almost bring back the energy and the memories and the dreams, if they could dream. That, you know, they would imagine all the currents of, in this case, of hot air and cold air, and how they also allowed this circuitry to keep on running.
That's a very interesting approach of media ecology that you are doing here. Maybe you know the term. It's Siegfried Zielinski. He was the director of the HFG sometimes, and he founded the Wilhelm Flusser Archive in Berlin and was co-founder of the Media Art School in Cologne. He is part of, let's say, scientific academic group that is working on this term media archaeology, because it's not only media theory or art theory, but it really will bring in the discourse the way of how our technical media is related to collective memory, to big data, and how this how science is based on these media transformations also. That's why the term archaeology is quite interesting, that you dig out some historical parts of the media praxis that is part of your artistic praxis.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely, and yeah, it is very much thinking about this media ecology, and also, quite frankly, the admiration for just the engineering marvel of all these devices that I think get thrown out with very little, shall we say, honor, you know. And I would like to give some of these devices a more onerous, more dignified ending through my artwork.
Mm-hmm. Let's have a look at the next ones. I don't know if we will go through all the details of the Latencies series, but probably we will have a focus on several special items. And in this second one, Zen, it has a more spiritual approach. Let us know about the inspiration that you had for this.
Well, it was in the recycling center that I found a bin of these little crumpled pieces of aluminum, these little aluminum balls that I then discovered were also computer components that just get kind of crushed and crushed and crushed. They almost become these little meteorites or little stones. And it's part of the recycling process where things break down and they almost become like minerals. They go back to that original mineral state they came from. They were extracted from the earth and then processed to become, you know, whatever, a computer or projector or whatever, or an iPhone. So I was kind of trying to think of the idea of almost like creating like a Zen garden with a little pellets of this kind of crushed and balled up computer components, almost referencing nature, rocks, but that are kind of altered rocks that you can see on the detail on the right, like almost like a sense of electromagnetic waves kind of spreading from the little clusters of aluminum. It is kind of a spiritual piece, and it was very fascinating to do research on Zen gardens, which was a big inspiration when thinking and composing this artwork.
So I can find some James Turrell elements still here, kind of this the ritual moments and the way of how even this media art is still part of a very meditative approach to the world. And the recycling topos, it's also quite fascinating in these works. And I want to follow the traces of this upcycling moment in your work, because it's not only recycling, and you would say you reuse something that has been obsolete, but it's a different way of transforming something into a new way of handling. That's what we would call upcycling, and especially with media that is obsolete, that has been trashed and abandoned, and you take it back, you reappropriate it for new artworks. And so I think we will have a look at this one at the last of the Latencies series, to exactly tell, here we have kind of a threshold from the analog to the digital sphere, we could say. So the basis, that's the screen in which the projection, or let's say not the projection, it's the moving image. that you can see through the lenses of these ocular instruments. And that reminds me on the first slide that we have shown, in which you brought up which you could present the installation from 2001, the Tetralogias, in which we have a similar topic. Is it right that these two works could be related?
Well, it's only now that I realized that they're related. So you saw something that a connection that I didn't, and of course they're directly related. It's about optics. What you see in all this collection of lenses from old cameras and projectors, this is all lenses taken also from discarded technologies. What you see when you peer into them, into the artwork, are microorganisms. Again, maybe this kind of Corona times, this kind of secret hidden life below the surface is something that is very present in my mind. But yes, it does directly relate to teratologies, and definitely the monsters of the moment are still lurking there. And yeah, there's almost like this kind of microscopic effect where the screen becomes not only a shelf, but I can map precisely onto the little optics placed on the shelf these microorganic life forms that you discover as you go from one lens to another. This is a great piece to appreciate in the real, because it's a fun thing to discover, all the life that's hidden in all these lenses.
Yeah, wonderful. We will open the discussion soon to the audience, because I can see there are some questions triggering in. But before, let's have a look at one of the last slides of this presentations, because you spoke about perspectives and hope and memory. And there is one certain work that I'm interested in, especially. It's this one. That's also, I guess, the last in our presentation. And when we've been talking about that, I want to disclose my own imagination, which, as a German art historian, immediately triggers the Lost Hope image, the painting by Caspar David Friedrich, which is a super romantic, it's a super icon of romanticism. And here you have a similar, let's say, aesthetic structure of the composition. Of course, it's super different, but from the depiction of the architecture, the projection that's coming like light from above, and something which I would call the nostalgia of a moment that has passed and which would not come back, because these small particles of an old computer and other devices would never come back again into use. And therefore, it's a bit the loss. It's a bit of not how we would call this mourning in a way of a tradition that has been overtaken. And in the catalog, at least 4 or 5 times, the term nostalgia is mentioned, but every time the next sentence is, but of course, Daniel, you are not nostalgic. The work is not about nostalgia. But why does it come up? That was my question. Because a friend of mine that I mentioned, Dominik Schrei, he was writing his PhD on analog nostalgia in the way of digital media practices, and how digital media is referring to a way of nostalgic analog media practices, because what is in the past seems to be something precious and lost today in the contemporary sphere. And that's my association coming around when I look at the Escape, which is the title of this work, ESC number 2. And so now let me have you answering or explaining a bit more about the basic motivation to create this series, which is different to the series that we talked before, and about the construction of this work.
Well, I have to say that I love your analysis and connection with the romantic sublime, and I think that's very beautiful, because the romantic sublime in a way was an escape from the world of machines, from the
yes.
the birth of the industrialism and machinery and invading all aspects of life, and that idea of like kind of analog nostalgia, suddenly that becomes very, very pertinent. So I love that analysis. So thank you very much. That's a real gift. I really, yeah, I don't think I'm quite nostalgic, but there is something about material-based analog created technologies that I do miss. I miss that kind of physicality of it, which has a lot to do with the physicality of the world, which has to do with the physicality of the human body. These are all components and elements that are constantly threading through my thinking and my work, including these broken coverings, casings of computers and electronics that have that kind of standard beige color that's so recognizable, was so recognizable from the past.
Yeah.
But broken and kind of accumulated as this found piece of archaeology. And that, yes, there is a certain kind of sadness. I try to bring it back to life through this overhead projection. This is part of this small data series. But I think your analysis of connecting it to the romantic sublime is brilliant. I love it. Thank you.
It's also about the salvaging moment of how you salvage obsolete instruments. Well, the materialization and the materiality would be one of the last keywords that we had to talk about. And materiality is a strong part of these small data series. And every one of us probably knows the term big data, but what would small data mean in your sense?
Well, I was in Silicon Valley 7 or 8 years ago with the idea of doing an artwork with big data, and I had meetings with every single company in Silicon Valley, from Apple all the way down, and I simply could not get their interest in my art project. So I finally kind of made my suitcase, came back to the studio, and I was like, darn big data, I'm going to do a series of small data, which are just my own, things that I can find in the garbage that I don't have to talk to Apple or to Facebook or to anybody else. So it was kind of like a little bit of a, darn you, I'm not gonna wait around to work with big data. I'll do my small data. Now I found a way of working with big data. It's taken me a few years, but that's where the small data is a little bit of a silly, ironic name, but also the sense of something that's highlighting our emotional connection to our consumer electronics. It's really trying to understand that the psychological tragedy that unfolds when we leave our smartphones in the taxi, that kind of major crisis that is such an indication of how incredibly attached we are to these devices, how they mean much more than just these kind of utilitarian devices. There's tremendous amount of psychic projection and emotional contact that we have with these devices. That's what small data was trying to explore.
Wonderful, Daniel. Thank you so much for all these detailed explanations. And maybe you can allow me one last question. There is currently a strong hype in the art world that is linked with artworks that are not based on their physical presence at all, like the medium as the screen or as a projection, but it's the artwork based on its bare information, which is coined by the blockchain technology, and it has a certain name called NFT, non-fungible token. And several artists in the last 4 weeks have been jumping on this train, as we would say in Germany. They've followed up that movement and been creating artworks that are also offered just as a digital one only. And is this something you could also imagine for your further artworks, or is NFT art something you keep away from?
I'm creating an artwork about NFTs. It's not an NFT in itself, it's thinking of the dematerialization of the artwork and its fluctuating values, because they're auctions where these NFTs are bidded. That has to do with some other works I've done with financial data. So I find really NFTs for me are more about cryptocurrencies than they are about art. And I guess that's kind of what interested me as a phenomena. As a medium in itself, it doesn't particularly interest me. I may end up doing an NFT. I'm getting phone calls left, right, and center from everyone that wants to do an NFT because it's kind of like this jackpot now. It seems like the art world has discovered. I find it a very interesting coincidence that one of the craziest value fluctuations that ever happened was the tulip a boom that happened. When was it, in the 16th century? When
yes, the from in the Netherlands.
And that, funnily enough, happened in the middle of one of the worst outbursts of the Black Plague. So here we are, many centuries later, a few centuries later, in the middle of a tremendous, horrific pandemic. And it seems like there's something about these crazy, speculative oscillations have something to do with being stuck at home and just kind of everybody kind of losing their minds.
It also shows a privileged part of the society in suspense towards a majority who is not that privileged, and therefore, in my opinion, it's also presenting a strong sociological inequivalence of the art world and art productions, which I not appreciate so much, but I accept it as a new phenomena. And I'm also interested in the ecological and sociological approaches of this movement. Yeah. But well, Daniel, I think we have to end here because there seem to be some questions. I don't know if I open the chat or if Marta will be managing the questions. Let's see what happens. I would end here and
let's hear the questions. I think Julia was going to read out the questions, either Julia or Marta.
Oh, hello again to everyone. Thank you, Daniel. Thank you, Sebastian, for this very amazing talk, for this discussion and this insight into your work, Daniel. This was really amazing. And yes, we do have some questions. And maybe, Sebastian, before I read out the question, you could go back to another of the small data series, so just that we see another image of the small data series. Thank you. And yes, so we have two questions from Patrick first. He says, great work and discussion, thank you. How would you take into account the inevitable obsolescence of the technology you use? To some extent, even the data generated from the sources you extract them from, or rather the channels through which they flow, could phase out or change in format or else?
Yeah, that's a question I get asked a lot. It's an important question. I think a lot about that. We think about it, my team and I, we think a lot about that. I think that we have entered a period where we should maybe start thinking about the biography of artworks as living entities that change, that transform, that have a life, that maybe even also have a death. And we have this tendency to want to freeze, like in formaldehyde, freeze artworks in time. You know, that, and I think museums tend to have that kind of tendency to just kind of really try to capture them and not let them deteriorate, not let them, for obvious reasons, for investment reasons, for conservation reasons, and also to be able to have future generations enjoy them. However, we do also try to think about the maintenance of our artworks. Most of the works that are data-based have a demonstration mode. Excuse me, getting a dry throat. But so, for example, we don't know if there's going to be any internet as we know it in 50 years or 100 years. But my artworks store the last 6 months of data. And so you could potentially present this artwork 100 years from now with a flavor, with a feeling of what it was like in 2021 when we did have internet and when there was data that we could access online. And so it's almost like the work is self-documenting itself. It's almost like the way you would see a photograph of a Joseph Beuys performance. And all you really have now is those photographs. In a way, my artworks are kind of documenting, self-documenting themselves. So that's one way we're kind of thinking around that dilemma. And also perhaps, not wanting to update artworks, but really try to keep the spirit of the technology that were created them in the moment, as in trying to keep Nam June Paik's analog screens alive rather than replace them with plasma screens. That's a problem that comes up a lot with this kind of pioneer media art. All our LEDs can be repaired. They're not thrown out, our LED tiles. We always sell a percentage of extras that get replaced while the ones that are getting damaged are getting repaired. So we do think a lot about this. We do also want the work to be enjoyed by future generations.
Thank you for this elaboration. And Patrick also has another question. You rightly said that algorithm is indeed a building block of your art, and it could eventually be the art piece itself. How would you consider that algorithms become the artist itself, if that makes sense?
I think it's a radical idea. I think it's a beautiful idea. Writing code is a form of writing. Perhaps in the future, we will be giving Nobel Prizes to the best algorithms that are created, or like the way we'd give the best literary awards. It is about writing. And I like that kind of, almost thinking of like Saul LeWitt's instructions to paint his large murals, where those murals get drawn in different buildings. This is kind of similar, and the algorithm is kind of like the nuclear element of the artwork. I like that idea very much. It's very appealing.
Thank you. Daniel, you can have a sip of water if you want.
Thank you. I should be drinking. Yeah, I'm getting really dry. I'm like super jet lagged. I just got off an airplane from Los Angeles, so I'm up to a little bit.
We appreciate it very much that you're here with us today.
My pleasure.
So there's a question or two questions by someone also named Daniel. I have a question about some of the other series of pieces, Synaptic Passage, and how it relates to these kind of programmation. Was there algorithmic work as well in this piece?
No. Synaptic Passage is more of my analog work. It's clusters of cables found in junkyards, dead cables that hang in a dark space, and I project animations onto these cables to reignite kind of the sense of energy coursing through the cables. It's a very it's an important piece of my career, my work. But this one is totally analog, optical, that is thinking about the internet, thinking about neurological firings, synaptic firings, relationship between the brain and this other brain that we call the internet. But it is very, very analog, really, and it's the way it was executed.
And he continues, I ask about these because I'm really interested about what you said of the data that is constantly changing in the space we live in. And I'm interested in the philosophical background in these pieces. And I would really like to know if it is related, as I said before, to Amalgama del Prado or other amalgamas in hyphen that you've done with the transmission of CNN news and other streamings. Probably he means something like the Ripple works.
Yeah, so Ripple artwork, which is using videos that are getting updated on CNN in real time, and I create an artwork with that. These works do have to do with this constantly streaming 24/7 cycles of information, the barrage and excess of it all. It feels like as an artist, everything is already being done. There's a sense of like, what can I possibly contribute to the art world now because everything is being done? Well, maybe that's what the art world has to be about that excess, about that sense of overload. And Ripple, Amalgama, many other of these projects are kind of looking at the collection, at the impossibility of capturing that full set of all the 4 thousand million videos that are on YouTube and trying to make an artwork with it, or trying to make an artwork with news that is, obviously constantly churning out new information, from a traumatic war that's igniting in Jerusalem to a silly video of a cat that's become viral. This kind of crazy fragmentation and dislocated data that's being thrown at us. As an artist, I'm trying to make sense of it. And I'm also trying to make sense of it in these very kind of hypnotic artworks that are very cyclical, that are very, in a way, mesmerizing. And I would say even mantric. They have like this kind of almost like a mantra. It's like trying to find this kind of secret inner order in this totally crazy mixture of elements.
Great, thank you. I have another question here. What's the relationship between your data artworks and the ones related to technological obsolescence, like latencies and small data?
It's really this historical arc I've been describing. We're kind of in the middle, and if behind us are all these ruins, I like to use the idea of ruins as a very Walter Benjamin reference. The progression of history leaves all these ruins behind, the kind of ruins that Benjamin was fascinated in exploring in Paris. So the obsolescence is all the ruins that are we leaving behind as we have this kind of full throttle dive into this world of big data. So we're in the middle, we're in between them, I'm in between them. I'm trying to understand that present moment. I'm trying to figure out where we're heading. And at the same time, I need to know what we're leaving behind, because big data is creating a huge environmental, ruinous, toxic dump site behind us. And I think I also am very interested in bringing that to the light.
Thank you. So are there any other questions? Please write into the chat. Let me see if there's anything else. I'm just getting from Anita, the gallerist. Thank you so much, Daniel and Sebastian, for this interesting talk with all this background information. And
I would also like to thank Anita for bringing us all together. Not only the exhibition, but this event. It's just been a wonderful collaboration, Anita, with you and your team, and to bring Sebastian and I, it's been a real luxury. I've loved this conversation, and Sebastian, also some of your insights I have loved. So they're being super interesting to me to see your vision. So thank you.
Thank you for your inspiring explanations on these works, and on the background of your artistic approach from art history, from media history, and from a very contemporary technological movement, meaning big data and working with algorithms and programming. Really fascinating work.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Thank you very much, and thank you everybody who's attended. It's been a great talk.
I'm afraid I can't leave you there yet, because there's another question by Gloria.
Okay.
I am interested in how you work in your studio. How do you collaborate with other people, engineers, manufacturers? And do you write your own code?
I do not write my own code, unfortunately. Hopefully one day I'll have the patience to learn how to write code. I have a programmer that works for me. And in my team, my studio, there's 8 of us. It's a very kind of multidisciplinary team, from programmers, engineers, artists, art historians, technicians, and even a lawyer who does all my financial work. I have a very hard time talking now of my work, and it's much easier for me to say we are doing this. It's a very collaborative team. I have the final say, but I do kind of feel we're a little bit of this kind of Renaissance kind of workshop in Florence that has all these kind of different profiles from architects, scientists, and artists coming together and coming up with new ideas. We're not in Florence, we're in an industrial suburb of Madrid. but we're very proud of the work we do. And I have an amazing team. I would be nothing without my team, and publicly want to thank them all here on this chat.
Great. Thank you very much for your elaborations. Thank you everyone for joining us. And it was amazing to have you two talk and enlighten us here. And Sebastian, maybe you can switch to the last section, to the last page. Exactly. So because apart from thanking you, Daniel and Sebastian, for this amazing talk, I would also still like to thank Neustadt Kultur and Stiftung Kunstfonds for sponsoring the exhibition Latencies and also this talk. And it has been amazing working with you. And yeah, I would urge everyone to check out our website, our Instagram, and also Daniel's Instagram and website. Unfortunately, because Zoom has its difficulties, it wasn't possible for us to show videos. Obviously, all of these artworks have moving image, so basically it's important that you check out the websites and the social media feeds in order to see the images moving. And obviously you can also contact us. We can send you links to videos and to all the artworks that are present in our exhibition. And yeah, also for this week, the coming week, the exhibition is still running. So yeah, you can basically also contact us to see the exhibition on individual appointments. And also I'm just receiving a text that it's now official. The exhibition is going to go to Berlin, to Galerie Kornfeld. So we've been collaborating with them recently, and so the exhibition will be able to be seen in Berlin as well. So yeah, thank you very much. And I hope you all have an amazing evening.
Thank you.
Have a good week, and thank you so much, Julia. Well, it was great. Great hosting also. Thank you. And also Marta in the background, who's been kind of coordinating the talk. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Martha, as well.
Adios. Have a good week.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.